I would like to show you a technique for managing legacy code better called Parameterise Constructor. Before we get into that, let's look at something else called the legacy code paradox. And it simply means that before we're changing legacy code and before we can put unit tests in place around that legacy code, we actually must change the legacy code first. So we have to break some dependencies, because oftentimes we can't put unit tests in place. There is something stopping us. Maybe it's a class that connects us to an external database. Well, for a unit test, as I'm sure you well know, we don't really want to connect to a database and expect the database to be in a particular schema with the data and all that. Unit tests really should be more local in process, and if we have to have something that if we have to connect to a database, then we would use something else that kind of stands in the place of the database, like a fake or a mock or a stub. You might have heard of those terms. But so we need to break some dependencies that are problematic and stop us from writing unit tests around the legacy code before we can put that in place. And before we do that, we need to break some dependencies first. How do we do that? Well, the resolution to the paradox is simply that we must go ahead and make some changes. However, those changes ought to be, small and minimal kind of refactorings, just enough to get the unit tests in, not some large-scale changes, large-scale refactoring that imposes a lot of change on the system. That would be problematic. That's likely in legacy code to lead to lots and lots of problems, which is not what we want. We want to make things better, not worse. All right, let's have a look at the code. Here we go. Today's sample code is in C#, .NET. We're here in Visual Studio, and we've got a customer database here. Okay, public class customer database. By the way, this is just a demo kind of class of what a legacy code can look like, and I use a class like this and other classes and other code just to sort of show how we can overcome certain legacy code problems. This is not actually a real code, but it will do the trick for the sake of this video and this technique of parameterizing constructors. Well, as we can see, customer database, has got a constructor, so we would create an instance of customer database, and then we would call instance methods to retrieve us customer data information, obviously from some sort of database. And down here is a method get customer, where we look to be retrieving a single customer by email address, and we'll use some sort of SQL customer DB to do that. Okay, fair enough. What we have identified for the sake of this particular example is that we want to wrap some unit tests around this get customer method here on our customer database class. This is where we want to make the changes, and in order to do that, let's just write a really simple unit test for this. So I'm going to come in here into the customer database.tests. The test that we've got so far is called bring class under test. I think the name will become a little bit clearer as we get more into it. So I'm just going to start out by kind of writing var, db for the customer database is equal to new customer database. So we're creating an instance of this customer database by calling into the constructor, and then we are calling the get customer method. Okay, we want an email address here, something like fred at example.com. Say, there we go. Okay, cool, lovely, cool. Let's just run this and see what happens. I'm running the unit test. There we go, it's running and it's failing. It's an object reference not set to an instance of an object. It's a null reference exception, and the problem is occurring on line 10. And line 10 is actually this call to instantiate a new customer database. We didn't even get to get customer. I didn't even get into here. So what this means is that we actually need to sort out the customer database constructor first. We can't even run through that. There is something that's stopping us from running that particular code. Okay, what I'm going to do is, because at the moment we don't even need it, right? We just need to bring the class under test. We need to be able to instantiate the class. So I've actually removed the method, and that's why the test is called bring class under test. I'm going to put down a breakpoint, and then we're going to debug in here just to see what's actually going on and what's stopping us completing this unit test run. All right, we're coming in here. We're calling it to a configuration manager.app settings. Looks like we're looking up some sort of connection strings, key. Okay, connection string is null, and then we're calling split on the null, and that's going to fall over. It's going to be a problem. There we go. That's the problem. Okay, so let's just kind of complete that, and we'll look at possible solutions. So, well, what can we do here to overcome this call to the configuration manager.app settings? It's a static call because we're using the configuration manager class. App settings is a property, and looks like it's an index property because we can provide it with a particular key to look up a property. That's great, and usually these work against some sort of configuration file with key value pairs in it for the app settings. A quick way to fix this broken unit test might be to just use the configuration file that we use in production. Yeah, so it would actually retrieve us the production connection string, and then we would actually try and connect to the production database, which might have its own problems. Okay, such as, well, we probably don't really want to connect to the production database. That might cause all sorts of problems. Right. For example, we might, here we're getting customer data, so maybe it's okay. But what if we write to the, if the unit test wrote to the production database? Well, that might cause all sorts of havoc by writing this dummy data into a production database. Well, we probably also would rather not actually try and connect to the production database or any kind of database, because unit tests or automated tests that try and do network I/O, like connecting to a database or to a web service or other kind of services, are by definition quite slow because they are going over a network. They're also fragile because the service or database or whatever it is needs to be there and needs to have the test data that we expect for these unit tests. So maybe in that way, using the production configuration file might not be the best idea here for the configuration manager call. Okay, how about a dummy configuration file? Well, maybe we could do that, but ideally for unit tests, so we don't want to do I/O, network I/O, but we don't want to do any I/O at all. We rather not do any input-output, and this is even reading from local files. Even that is a little bit fragile, relatively slower than just working with in-memory kind of data. So ideally, we would not even create a fake or unit testing kind of configuration file, which has got other problems, like maybe by accident it would get deployed to production and cause all sorts of havoc. So maybe we're better off staying away from that. So is there another solution for us here? And I say yes, there is, and it's this idea of parameterizing our constructor, this constructor here. All right, so let's kind of get into it. To start with, I will make a copy of the customer database default constructor. So I've just done that now, and the Visual Studio IDE is complaining because you can only have a single default constructor, which is fine. So let's give this constructor here a parameter, and I'm making this the connection string. So it's like we're passing the connection string into this constructor, which of course also means we no longer need this line here. We're retrieving the connection string from configuration. Now the connection string gets passed into us as an argument, which is great for unit testing because we can actually set our own connection string, okay, to kind of whatever we want. So if we kind of go back to the unit test, we could do something like, I think it required a hyphen, so I'm going to make it this. We could do that. All right. Okay, fantastic. So this would be great for unit testing. However, up here is the default constructor that is still being used by our production code. We would rather have this code being used by our production code. But might that not cause some other problems? Well, let's find out. Let's say I commented out this particular constructor here, the default constructor, and we go to the references. So we've got a unit test, but then we've got the second one here from the customers controller. Let's go there. It's complaining. It's saying, hey, our customer database, we're trying to instantiate it with a new operator. However, we now need a parameter. Okay, well, what might that parameter be? I'm just going to come back to here. That parameter would actually be this app settings call. So let me come over here. What we would want to do is something like this. However, is this a minimal kind of refactoring? Remember from our legacy code paradox that yes, in order to get unit tests in, we need to make some changes to the code, but we want to really minimize those changes. This doesn't look like a minimalistic kind of change to me, because what if a customer database is being newed up in 57 different places? We would have to make these changes everywhere. That seems rather disruptive. We would be better off, I feel, if we could make our changes in such a way that we can retain the default constructor. Okay, so let's kind of come back to here. And maybe we can find a way in which we can retain this constructor here. Is there such a way? Yes, there is. And let me show you. So these two constructors here are effectively the same, just this line here where we go into the configuration manager and retrieving the connection string. That is different. And it would be lovely if this particular constructor could call into this one, passing in the configuration manager app settings as the connection string. Is there a way? Yes, there is. And it just goes like this. Oops. And we're going to pass in that. That's where we get our connection string. So this is another constructor. Oh, it's lovely how it highlights it. Here we go. Customer database with the connection string. We're passing in the connection string, which we get from the configuration file. This is great for our production code, right? We don't want to disturb that, and at the moment we haven't. And then given that the remaining code is the same, we can actually remove what we've got here. So now this constructor is empty. Okay, let's check out what the production code calls. So customers controller, for example, news up a new customer database. Go to implementation. Let's see what's being called. Okay, it's calling into the default constructor, which is forwarding the call to the constructor with the connection string parameter, and the argument for the connection string parameter is the value that comes out of the configuration file. Lovely. That is exactly from then on in what we had before. What about with regards to unit testing? Unit testing, Here we go, we've got customer database, connection string. Why don't we here just debug into it? Might be easier. Okay, and let's step into it. We immediately come into the Parameterise constructor, our new constructor, with the connection string con-string, which is our dummy connection string that we've provided that had to have a hyphen in it. Okay, and we're splitting it. Look, we got past that point, which is great. Early on we had a null, and then we'll probably come to grief here. We'll be trying to connect to the SQL database, which is something that we still have to fix. However, for now, we got a little bit further. There we go. There's the problem. It's saying, okay, this is not a valid connection string. And we don't actually want to connect to the database, so we'll need to figure out a way of solving this particular dependency problem. There you go. You've learned about Parameterise Constructor as a dependency breaking technique to get legacy code, especially C# legacy code, under test. I hope you found that helpful. Please leave a comment. If you liked this instruction, this technique, please like it and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.